Thank you so much for being here with me today, Amanda. I've been a longtime fan of your content, so I really appreciate you joining me for this conversation.
Yes, so long overdue. I totally agree.
Absolutely. Well, for those of you on my channel who don't know Amanda, will you just share a bit about your story? If you want to talk a little bit about what drew you to health coaching in terms of your own personal health history, I think it'd be great for people to just get some of that context.
Oh, yeah, sure. Where do I start? I love the backstory because it really gives you an idea of who this person is and why they actually care about helping you. So I love to ask people about this as well, because as you know, pain becomes passion. You have to figure it out for yourself. Therefore, you have a lot of experience and empathy for other people going through it. Well, in general, my mom says I was born with allergies. She says I was allergic to my stuffed animals and dust. And I remember not being able to use blankets, and I would get bronchitis and pneumonia constantly growing up, especially when the seasons changed. I grew up in West Virginia, so we had all three seasons equally. And I had really bad asthma. I was on inhalers and breathing treatments pretty often. And then I became a competitive swimmer, which was supposed to be helpful for asthma. At least that's what the doctors said back then. And I did pretty well. I excelled in that. I was a firstborn child of three. So I have a lot of those like type A qualities. And of course, back in the early 80s and the 90s, achievement was how we really drove kids to be the best versions of themselves. And I was really good at achieving. School was easy for me. Going from school to swimming was easy for me. So I really learned at a young age to stuff down any sort of emotions. And in sports, they say you can't miss practice, you'll miss your funding. It doesn't matter if you're sick, you have to keep performing. If you miss too many days of school, you get scolded. So I was really good at shutting things down. That's really where a lot of that began. And part of that was also because not just the culture at the time, but my family was German, Irish, and just really heavy alcohol users. And so we didn't talk about certain things. We didn't ever. I don't remember any sort of like co-regulation at all. And I had a great loving childhood, but there was no emotional regulation. It was
Yeah.
go to your room or deal with it, stop crying, suck it up. You have to go to swim practice. There was nothing there. And definitely part of that was because my parents had a hard time with their own emotions and emotional regulation. So they definitely didn't have capacity for mine. And so, of course, just like any child growing up with heavy addiction or mental health issues, I became a licensed counselor. And through that education is where I developed a lot of awareness. Oh, this is why I'm like this. Oh, this is why they're like this. But during that time period, and especially starting that career, I started working in psychiatric hospitals, which was incredibly stressful. Everyone is in crisis all of the time. I felt like my life was in danger every single day because of the type of clients that I was working with. People sent there from jail, people who are detoxing from heavy drugs and alcohol, severe psychosis, people who, I worked in the admissions department for a couple years, and people would bring in knives because they wanted to kill other people and kill themselves. And we didn't have any security at that hospital. And so that was my first crash. I started losing all of my hair and went into what they would call like adrenal fatigue. And it was during that time period that I really got more of a desire to learn about functional medicine or root cause medicine. And I did a hair tissue mineral analysis at that time. And the doctor said, this is the worst calcium shell I've ever seen in my, 10 years of practice. If that test is something that I use now, that the calcium was almost at 600, which should be around yeah, really severe.
Like under 150 is what it should be, right? Around there.
The calcium shell starts at 165. So it was what they call a petrified pattern. And definitely made sense with my history. And of course, I also was abusing drugs and alcohol, during that whole time period, even being a counselor, because of course, high stress, high stakes, high achievement, self-sabotage, denial, it all just, bled perfectly into my life. And then I went back to school for functional medicine thinking, oh, I'm going to switch careers. This is going to be much better. I'm actually going to help people instead of just telling them to take their medicine. And it was during that time that I got exposed to mold after having hepatitis A. And then that's when I fully developed full blown mast cell activation. And mine was rashes all over the entire body. Asthma, of course, was flaring really bad. And really just an intense feeling of unwell, like unsafety, anxiety, can't sleep, panic. I was having really bizarre thoughts. Like I felt like I was swallowing too much air and I didn't know how to swallow anymore correctly. So it was like, what is going on? what has this mold done? And then I graduated that functional medicine program and I was like, my self-esteem is in the gutter. None of this has helped me. I'm the worst I've ever been. And that's when the self-learning really started and the radical responsibility.
Oh, okay. You know what's so wild, Amanda? I knew we had a lot in common, but hearing you talk, I'm like, wow, we have a weirdly large amount in common. Yeah, there's so much I want to get to and dig into more just from what you just shared. But let's start with the mental health field because, I'm also the licensed professional counselor. I actually just let go of my license.
Oh,
officially this year, fully committed to just health coaching. So that's been an interesting ride. But my initial health crash also happened in my first 2 years of working in community mental health. And just, I think it just shows like the lack of resources that they have to really support people who are working like on the front lines, basically, of our society.
So really both of them, both sides.
100%. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. We're not given the right tools to help people who are in the most need. And then the people that they're asking to help, they're just not given the resources. So can you talk a little bit more about, because you mentioned that when you first went into your counseling program, like you did make a lot of connections about maybe how your early life or family experience had led to some of your symptoms. Could you talk a little bit about your perspective on what is helpful about kind of the conventional mental health field and maybe what it misses out on from your perspective?
Yeah, great question. So the awareness is always step one. It's hard to change if you don't think that there's a problem. And the denial that I had about a lot of that was preventing me from changing a lot of things. So when I learned about specific things like cognitive behavioral therapy and existentialism, really blew my mind back then. It was like, oh, I'm literally stuck in this trap of just repeating the same patterns. And if I do something different and think about things differently, I could change. Like it was so simple. And some of those concepts are, I think, really essential for understanding why this stuff works. Like I'm sure you had been to a lot of practitioners and maybe people that do energy work that they don't really explain what they're doing. And they just start the session and you get finished and you're like, well, that felt great, but did that do anything? I like to explain the science behind why this stuff is working and some of the research and studies that have taken place that are maybe making measurements in people's like brainwave states or heart rate variability. So they understand this is why I'm asking these questions, or this is why we do this psychosensory touch, or this is why we do something. So you're aware and not just thinking, oh, this person's, wasting my money, that kind of stuff. So I do love psychology for that reason. And I also think one of the biggest, best things to come out of traditional psychology is attachment disorders, or really attachment in general, and understanding how you are in relationships and what your needs are and what other people's needs are. I mean, there are some really incredible, amazing things that have come out of counseling and psychology. But that I feel like is one of the big ones. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I would so agree that if we're looking at what health coaching tends to leave out, it's examining people's relationships. And I wonder if you found this, some of my clients that I feel like have had some of the most stubborn symptoms or stubborn conditions, when we really get down to what may be blockages going on that we haven't addressed, I almost always find that there's something going on in their family system that they haven't disclosed yet, right? They're in an unhappy marriage. They're living with parents, that they have some kind of a strained relationship with. There's unresolved grief. There's something like that going on. I think attachment theory explains so well why that's happening and how our relationships have such a physiological impact on the state of our nervous system. Do you find that as well?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's something that I talk about probably in the first session is, what do your relationships look like? Who do you talk
Yep.
to?
Yeah. 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 So, but then of course, being a licensed counselor yourself, wasn't enough to address this petrification that you had in your system on a physiological level. And HTMA is something I've been starting to use with my clients as well, just because it does give so much insight onto what's happening on so many different levels in the physiology. So I'd love to talk about that a little bit too. And people might be wondering like what a calcium shell even is. Can you get into that for a moment?
Oh, yeah, this is one of my favorite things to talk about because when I read what a calcium shell is, I was like, this is my entire personality. I am
Yep.
baffled.
So I also had a calcium shell. I think it was more like 300, but it was definitely very significant as well. So yeah,
mhm.
I definitely resonate with this. Yeah.
Yeah, so a calcium shell is when you're looking at the hair tissue calcium on a specific type of test, the hair tissue mineral analysis. And if the calcium is above 125 on that test, or sorry, 165, you're in this active calcification process. Basically, calcium is being pulled out of your bones and your teeth to literally calcify you, to harden you up, to protect you, to create this wall, which is why they call it a calcium shell. So when I was reading about it, of course, it goes into this is most likely a trauma pattern, a result of really high stress and really high inflammation, because you're building this wall. Your body it thinks very logically, and this is something that I also loved studying through the lens of German new medicine. But with calcium, this isn't even German new medicine. It's just how the body works, and your body is like, okay, well, this pain is really significant. This stress has been going on a really long time, and we don't want to feel this pain anymore. Well, what can we do? Well, we've got this large amount of calcium in the bones, and it's very strong and sturdy, and it's going to be very numbing. So it'll pull that out to deposit it in your soft tissue so that you start to feel numb. So you start to not feel that pain as much anymore. So you're stronger, literally. And of course, if
Yeah.
you've heard of like calcification of the arteries, the pineal gland, it's not good. We don't need it. We
Yeah.
don't want it. And so you do start to maybe feel a little bit more numb. And at the time for me, it was like this. I was even painting my nails gray at the time because I was like, I just don't feel like any colors. Like I don't feel connected to anything. Nothing was happy for me. Nothing was really sad either. And I just assumed it
Yeah.
was from my 10 years of partying and drug and alcohol use. So then, of course, led me to really use those even more at the time to feel something, to feel love and connection or excitement to other
Yeah.
people. Because otherwise, I didn't really feel almost anything. And my voice is already pretty monotone. So you can imagine, like, it was just pure flat, like no emotion.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you can also list or call that like functional freeze. Like I just felt like I was going through the motions all day long. Like, what do I do next? Just out of habit for living my life. And of course, on paper, I was getting promotions. I was doing pretty well career wise. I was still working out. Like it wasn't like that full crash where you can't function yet. I hadn't gone through mast cell yet, but it was just there's no life in me really, and that's what it felt like.
Yeah. 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 When I see these numbers on people's HTMA tests, like I'll often ask them things like, do you feel like you have a hard time like connecting with people or being intimate? Like when I say the word like sensual, like does it make you recoil?
Yeah.
Like how do you do with eye contact? These kinds of questions. And across the board, it's like, oh no, none of
Yeah.
that. Like I don't do well with any of that. Right. And it's like
Yeah.
you're putting a wall between yourself and the world.
Yeah, exactly. Same. I could not look at people in the eyes, especially if they had broken my trust. Like it was impossible. And that's why I was using certain types of drugs to feel
Yes.
connected to other people.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And such a good point that I mean, these these patterns happen for a good reason initially, just like every dysfunction that we have comes from a good place initially in the body. It's trying to protect you, it's trying to harden you. It's saying we felt pain for so long. Let's give you a little break. Let's give you a little relief.
Yeah.
But of course, the dark side of that is okay, now I don't feel anything, now I can't connect to anything, now I don't love or feel passionate about anything, and then maybe we overcorrect in other ways like overusing substances or doing other extreme behaviors. So I love that the HTMA can give such a clear description of what's going on like in the nervous system states.
Mhm.
um and so, it's interesting. There's the lifestyle practices that you have to ship with that, right? Of course, like addressing trauma, and I'd love to talk to you more about that in a moment. But there's also physical aspects to this calcium shell as well in terms of nutrient imbalances and things like that. What do you see mostly
Yep.
going on, like on a nutrient level or a toxicity level with the calcium
Mhm.
shell?
Yeah, often what goes hand in hand with that is this copper toxicity or bio unavailable copper. And I had been a vegetarian for 10 years at the time. So
Okay, yeah.
that also contributed to this
Hmm.
massive calcium shell, most likely, because your adrenals actually are required to be sick to signal to your liver to make ceruloplasmin, which is the protein that copper needs to be bound to, so that we can actually use it. And when we
Yeah.
can't use that copper, it's going to build up in the brain, which means faster neurotransmitter synthesis, oftentimes more anxiety, OCD like symptoms, trouble sleeping, maybe even to the point in extreme cases of like major mental health diagnoses. And then it also can build up in the liver. And also at the same time, we need copper to break down histamine, is a big one. We need copper to regulate our fungal microbiome and then also our parasite biome too. So, what I see all the time is we've got someone who's dealing with chronic mold toxicity, mast cell activation of histamine issues, chronic parasitic overgrowth, fungal overgrowth. They've done a million things to try to address those two things, decades sometimes. And the candida never goes away, or they just pass parasites on these cleanses for years and it never stops.
Yeah.
Then they've got the calcium shell. So they're really difficult. They have a hard time with working one on one with people sometimes, or they feel like it doesn't do anything because it's really hard to maybe even engage or go deep enough to actually
Yeah.
do some of that deep work because they're so shut down. And they're frustrated. They're usually managing their life, though. That's the thing. They're usually like
Yeah.
barely floating. They've got families, they've got jobs, and they're like on the brink of not being able to
Yeah.
function, but they still can.
Yeah. 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 So important how all of these factors work together. Like it's not just about the trauma you've experienced, although that's a big part of maybe why you've had the parasitic accumulation, why you've had the fungal accumulation, why copper has gotten so high, maybe also related to our diet and other lifestyle factors, but then our body wants to correct the effects of the high copper, right? Because that's really uncomfortable emotionally too. Like when we're having
Uh-huh.
these really agitated emotions because of the high copper. And so then our body is correcting with the calcium shell. I mean, you can just see how this becomes
Yeah.
this perfect storm with people and they get so far down the rabbit hole with this. So you're really, it sounds like helping people zoom out and see that big picture of what's
Mhm.
going on.
Yeah, exactly. I also forgot to mention estrogen dominance with the copper issues
Oh yeah.
too. So sometimes they'll get lost in I got to fix my hormones and try other things for that with no success. So yeah, and you mentioned
Right.
nutrients. I didn't even mention nutrient imbalances. So the adrenals, of course, sodium and potassium usually is low in the tissues. But one of the things we actually use to raise sodium and potassium are B vitamins. I know you love B vitamins too.
Yeah.
So through that chronic stress, you're going to really deplete your Bs, and then we'll have lower tissue sodium and potassium, and then you'll feel more burnout. and then blood pressure may be impacted. So we've got mast cell symptoms, maybe POT symptoms too now, and
Yeah.
everything's connected.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, did you start working to get rid of that calcium shell right away, or did you just kind of get this information, but then like go on with your life until the mold happened? How did that
Yeah,
all play out for you?
I did work with that doctor for a bit back. It was like 2014 or 2015, but then I
Uh-huh.
moved to Miami, and then I just moved to Miami. I'm gonna party. I'm not gonna work on my health anymore.
Right.
My hair had grown back, so I was like, okay, I'm not as bad as I was a year ago. So I feel like it's
Right.
quote unquote resolved. And
Right.
then I didn't, yeah, no, I didn't do any of the stuff that I had been doing. That 2015 is when I actually learned how to meditate. And that was definitely one of those people who was like, I can't meditate. I can't sit still. I can't stop
Mhm.
thinking. It does not shut off.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So the mold was maybe like the thing that happened that like really forced you to go like face to face with what your body really needed, it turned out, right? It
Yeah.
took a big crash. Yeah.
Yeah. The hepatitis A, I was hospitalized. That was really scary. And of
Oh
course,
wow. Okay, yeah.
spiritually, right before that, I had just had a really traumatic failed relationship where I had moved states and then I moved back and I was homeless, literally like sleeping on my friend's couch. And I was like, okay, what I've been doing is not working. And
Yeah.
I really want a reason to stop partying. I was like, I think I was 31 at the time. I was like, I'm in my 30s. Like, why do I keep doing this? And then, of course, I
Yeah.
had hepatitis A literally a month later. And I was like, this is a great,
Wow.
great reason to quit drinking. But it wasn't enough because then I was like, maybe I'll just give it 6 months. And then, and in my head, I really still wasn't ready. And then it was definitely the mold, which was about a year and a half process of getting sicker and sicker. That I was like, okay, there's no going back. I have to become a totally different person.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I feel like there is this point of acceptance or surrender on like what your body is actually trying to tell you, and people don't recover until they hit that point. And like it can be so brutal. Like for some people, I think you and me fall into this category, and a lot of our clients where things have to get so bad before you finally like actually like let go and
Right.
listen.
Yeah.
I don't know, I'm just curious if you can share a little bit of your own insights into that process and what that was like for you.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think in all aspects of change, like even when they look at people who are successful with losing weight, they say the same
Yeah,
thing. I had to become a totally different person because
yeah,
subconsciously our brain, our ego, our psyche, whatever you want to call it, is set up to keep things the same as they've always been because
right.
anything that's different is unsafe. That's how our species has evolved, and
Yeah,
plays a very important role with survival, but it also makes
yeah,
change really, really hard. So in order to shift the things that are happening in your life and the way that your body's reacting to things, you have to shift your perception of what's possible and who you are.
yeah,
And I think that like for me, there's that voice in your head that things aren't that bad. Things aren't that bad yet. Or I wasn't that bad. Like I have friends that were worse than me. So there's that
right.
back and forth between like bargaining and when you have to change everything about yourself, I think you go through those stages of grief for the old
Yeah,
you. And you probably have depression, anger, why me, why nobody else has to change, and then you go through that bargaining phase and then finally you reach that acceptance that I have to surrender because all of the things outside of me that I was trying were not working, and that's
yeah,
when you finally realize this has to come from inside and there's no other way around it.
yeah. Did you really experience that shift very viscerally? Like, did you start feeling different just from that mindset shift, or did it take
I wish.
longer? No? Okay, yeah,
No, no,
yeah.
definitely not. And I didn't even go into the fact that I went through topical steroid withdrawal, which was really oral prednisone withdrawal.
Oh, that's right.
But that was the absolute worst hell. And it was in those moments where I couldn't feel any sort of comfort. There was no break from feeling the worst pain and itchiness you've ever felt in your life. And I remember in that moment, like when I felt, okay, I'm surrendering to this. I'm not going to do anything else outside of myself. I'm going to only do the things that are working on trauma and nervous system work. And Dr. Joe Dispenza, or I think Tony Robbins is the first person to say this, but the pain of staying the same finally has to outweigh the pain of the change. And
Right.
you have to, like, if you think of the best moment in your life and the worst moments in your life, you have to make that emotional decision to change. And you have to
Yeah.
remember that it feels what that feels like. And I remember that exact moment. So if you make these promises
Wow.
for you to change, you cannot just say it in your head, oh, I'm going to change. It has to be such heightened emotions that it'll be embedded in your memory as, okay, we're doing things differently from now on. And I'm
Yeah.
definitely not 100% changed. I still have a lot of qualities that I used to have. Some of those
Sure.
qualities that drove me to be sick also drove me to be successful. So there's also like a resistance to some of those aspects, like, oh, well, if I'm, not overworking, what's going to happen to my business, And
Right.
there's kind of a back and forth. And what I noticed even on testing with the calcium shell, well, what happened is I'd come out of the calcium shell into another pattern and then I'd go back into it, but it would be less. And then I'd go out of it into another pattern and then I'd come back into it, but it would be less. And that's pretty much been happening the last 2 years that I've really been working on it. That it's
Yeah.
kind of like this, let's take 2 steps forward, then I'll take 1 step back. Then I'll take 2 steps forward,
Yeah.
1 step back. And I think that's true for a lot of people. Everyone knows
Yeah.
healing isn't linear.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it is. It is this like spiralized process. It seems like there was this moment where it was like, all right, like I'm just, letting go of the reins and I'm just totally surrendering to what I need to do. But it's not like then things are just magically better after that. Those same patterns in your nervous system and your same, personality tendencies. I mean, we all have kind of an innate temperament, right?
Right.
Those are still going to be there. And it is going to be this like ebb and flow of experiencing what it's like to be in life differently. And then kind of the old patterns being triggered and coming back, and then reminding ourselves, like, oh, wait, I'm going to
Yeah.
approach this differently and going back. And symptoms seem to come and go like that too. Like, there's so often this, the symptoms will improve and then they'll come back and then they'll improve and then they'll come back. And then, and so it does seem like part of the surrender is not just to totally doing things differently, but like accepting also that ebb and flow of the healing process.
Yeah, totally agree. That anytime something comes up without judgment, I'm going to notice it, pattern interrupt, choose something different.
Yep.
Oh, something came up again. No judgment, pattern interrupt, choose something different. And I'll just
Yeah.
keep doing that over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you feel like you kept going forward though? Because I mean, you're talking about so many things that happened to you in a fairly short period of time. And I think so many people listening to this have probably had similar experiences where it wasn't just a 1-2 punch. It was like a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 punch, right?
Yes.
Where it's like you're talking about struggling with addiction, topical steroid withdrawal, a traumatic relationship, hepatitis A, mold. I mean, this all hit you in a short period of time. I mean, is there something that you feel like was what helped you not just give up? Like what kept you pushing forward?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I feel like I came into this world wanting to help people, but really I probably feel like it was me being over parentified as a child. And, I always took care of my little brother, my little sister. I still feel very protective over them and still definitely love to play that role. But I always felt like I saw the bigger picture of like not just my family unit, but where I grew up was heavy addiction. Nothing really changed. Very culturally isolated in West Virginia and surrounded by
Yeah.
very significant poverty. And I always
Yeah.
grew up really wanting to help people. Like I never wanted to do anything different besides be an artist, which, was a hobby. But I couldn't imagine doing anything differently. So I always had this, okay, I know that I'm going through this because I have to understand what it feels like to have that empathy to be able to shift into helping people. And if I don't believe that you can get better from this, then how on earth are other people supposed to get better? So I knew that
Yeah.
that was a big part of it. Like I had to believe, I had to keep going. I never a lot like even the person that diagnosed me with mast cell, and of course a lot of other people mentioned it afterwards, but I was kind of like, how dare you? I will not have that. Like, that is not gonna be part of my story. This is not happening. And I think because of my history, at least with counseling and psychology, I was aware that who I thought of myself and what I believed to be true was going to be very important. So I kind of knew like I can't hold on to these labels. Even now, that's still very hard for me. It's not easy, but
Yeah.
I just always felt like there's a bigger purpose for this, and it's definitely to start helping people. And of course, 2020 when I was really struggling, the C word came. And now the explosion of MCAS and POTS and connective tissue disorders is just
Yeah.
rampant. So, and then
Yeah.
now I feel like, oh, I feel like I can actually help these people.
Yeah. That sense of purpose,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like I really had that feeling too, and I wasn't totally sure what it even was at the time because I felt like, well, I was a mental health therapist. Now I'm horribly sick and I don't know if I'm ever going to get better. Like I don't know what I'm going to end up doing, but I did have this sense too of like there's something for me on the other side, and just
Mm-hmm.
really holding firm to that faith. And then I also had the experience like 2020 happened. I was like, oh, like I got into remission from MCAS in 2019. And so it was like within a year, that
Yeah.
that all happened. And so I was like, okay, we like the world needs a wave of healers,
Mm-hmm.
after this event. So yeah, I think that's so powerful, whatever the purpose is, or even if you're not sure what it is, like having a sense that there is something and there is something for you on the other side, no matter what that other side ends up looking like.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I agree.
So maybe we can get a bit more into MCAS now. I'm
Oh, yeah.
curious just, you know, considering that there has been such an explosion of mast cell disorders and histamine disorders in the last few years. And there are more people talking about it. I'm curious if you maybe can talk a bit about your perspective on MCAS and kind of what the roots
Mhm.
of it are, and maybe things that you maybe, don't necessarily agree with that tends to be in kind of the mainstream presentation of MCAS. Yeah, just share some of your thoughts.
Yeah. So I kind of broke this down probably like a year ago. I have a webinar that's $25 called How to Heal Mast Cell Activation and Histamine Intolerance. And in this, I teach what I think are the 6 layers of mast cell. So the 6 layer is the most outermost layer that most people understand. We're in cell danger response. Mast cells are degranulating. There's a threat, right? Like we get that. And we have to stabilize this in some way, somehow, for us to go deeper in these layers typically. Otherwise, you're just going to waste your money. A lot of people either are so sensitive they can't do almost anything. I worked with people who are sensitive to even feeling relaxed. And then
Yes.
there's another boat. Yeah. And then there's another boat of people, which is where I felt like fell into, which was absolutely nothing I did or changed moved the needle at all. Like there
Yeah.
was no like I could eat anything I wanted, but even if I ate nothing, nothing changed. Yeah, I could take a bunch of supplements or take nothing, nothing would change. Um,
Right.
so I feel like and especially when I was at my worst, it was like, how could you even imagine doing trauma work or nervous system work with someone when I was literally shaking? You know what I mean? Like something
Right.
had to stabilize this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that I do agree
I
with.
think that,
Yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
I just want to pause you there because I just really want to emphasize this because so many people just want to jump to the fix, and
Mm,
understandably, like you're miserable when you're in full-blown mast cell activation, like you suffer so much. So it's completely understandable to just be like, what's the thing that's gonna fix it?
yeah.
But then people spend these like tens of thousands of dollars on these protocols, these heavy metal detoxes, these mold detoxes, these Lyme treatments, like whatever they've decided is their root cause, and their body is just not in a place to take it. It either makes it worse, like everything they do makes them worse, or like they literally just flush that 10 grand down the toilet, right? Like nothing
Yeah.
changed at all. Because you're in that cell danger response. And I think most people watching this probably know what that is, but I'll just say briefly, this is just a theory that when your body is detecting that it's under chronic threat, like things actually start to change in the cell on a metabolic level that is going to make your body respond to things in a more aggravated way and in a more threat response kind of way. And so it's actually a shift on a cellular level that happens there. And it explains part of why people with MCAS are so sensitive to everything and reacting to things that to other people would be totally inert. So yeah, I mean, it sounds like you also just really prioritize getting people some amount of stability before you do any kind of intensive protocol.
Definitely. And sometimes I might look like prescription meds, and it's
Sure.
okay if that's what you
Yeah,
need in that moment. For me, nothing holistic touched anything I was experiencing.
yeah,
I required heavy doses of antihistamines for a while there, and
yeah,
even some other prescription meds that I tried for a temporary amount just to come out of that, like, I'm so stressed I can't tolerate anything, and to finally feel like,
yeah.
okay, things have opened up. I can go a little deeper now.
I'm
um,
so glad you said that because I have so many people who come to me and they're like, I'm on all these antihistamines. Like, is that okay? Because they've read somewhere that like antihistamines, mess up your gut microbiome or they're hard on the liver or, like damage your brain, like with Benadryl or things like that. And it's like,
yeah,
I mean, it's not that that's wrong. Like, they're not great for you long term, but at the same
right.
time, like, we've got to pick our battles, right? And
Yes.
so, if you need to be on those mast cell stabilizers and those antihistamines at first, like, there is absolutely nothing wrong with taking advantage of Western medicine just to get you through the initial states. I mean, goodness, I was
Mm-hmm.
taking so much Benadryl when I was in my
Yeah.
first couple months of healing. Like, oh my gosh, yeah,
Yeah, I was already addicted to Benadryl prior to even getting sick because I used it for
yeah,
sleep, thinking it was harmless because
right,
I always had histamine issues my whole life. So
right, yeah.
I can't even fathom the amount of Benadryl that I've taken in my life.
Right. Yeah. And we both still recovered. Like anyone
Mm-hmm.
listening, if you're feeling guilty about taking your antihistamine, like don't. There will be a day you can get off it, but it is
Yeah.
okay right now.
Yeah, totally agree. So layer 6 is that. Layer 5 is where a lot of people get stuck to. This is chronic infections, chronic
Yeah.
toxicity. Our toxicity bucket is overflowed. You got histamine because you're reacting to mold or candida overgrowth or parasites or heavy metals or all of it. And it can be really hard for a lot of people to tolerate these types of treatments, especially, through maybe a naturopath or functional medicine doctor who's not really educated on mast cell activation. Or you
Yeah.
could be like me, where you did this for a year or two and nothing was getting better. It was just
Yeah.
the same, if not worse. And then, so we obviously know that's going on. Okay, so why do we have chronic infections? Why do we have more toxicity than maybe the person next to us? Well, let's go
Yeah.
deeper. What's going on with our organs and tissues? Why would our organs not be working? Why would our tissues be accumulating heavy metals, calcification? Um, Deeper than that is, okay, we've got hormone dysregulation. Our hormones help to tell the body, certain nutrients where to go. And chronic stress is obviously a big factor here, but it could be, thyroid because of amalgams and mercury. It could be the parathyroid gland and calcium. Okay, so why do we have disruptions in our hormones? And why do we not have enough nutrients? Well, lower than that, of course, is getting into that chronic stress, chronic lifestyle stressors, which you don't even have to have big T traumas. Our world today, I'm sitting in front of computer screens, severely dehydrating me. I live in a high rise where I can't even touch the earth. I'm very disconnected from nature. I'm with EMFs all day. And then I had a decade of drug and alcohol abuse. So I'm sure my nutrient status was really poor as well. And then the food that we eat, processed foods, even if you're eating semi-healthy, I was a vegetarian for many, many years. I wasn't getting probably hardly any zinc and no B12. I definitely wasn't supplementing. So all of that accumulation, okay, well, why are we so stressed besides the lifestyle? Well, that nervous system trauma piece is also a big factor in most people. And even deeper in the very core level is oftentimes those subconscious beliefs of I'm not good enough, I have to achieve to prove my worth, or the avoidance type behaviors. Like for me, it was overworking and just denying that I even had any feelings and acting like nothing bothered me, even though it significantly did bother me. So I was not speaking my truth, not connected to my body. I determined that my body was unsafe. I didn't like it. So, you're stuck in your head. And then even like through the lens of Western medicine, it could be the lens of, oh, I just have histamine issues my whole life, or I have allergies and I have to take this medicine, or I have an autoimmune condition and I'm never going to get better. And just believing that those labels maybe that you've been given that's it for you. And then going back to that topic on the ego and change being scary and dangerous for our psyche, all of that together, of course. And then the big T traumas, of course, are even more significant for chronic stress, chronic hypervigilance. Through that lens of psychoneuroimmunology, we know that our emotional state will predict how our immune system is responding. And so all of it together, you got all those different layers. And some people will get better going from the top down. Some people will get better with level 6, level 4 core. It just depends on like what mixture you need and what kind of support you need.
Well, and the body is self-healing, right? So maybe everyone has issues on all those levels, but for some people, like just getting at the ones that are most significant to their system, like the others will self-correct, So
exactly,
I know it might sound really overwhelming to people hearing about these 6 layers, but I think you're totally on point, and I love that you try to look deeper than, so many people want to stop at the, mold, Lyme, parasites, this outer layer, which, to be fair, I mean, that's an improvement from the Western medicine approach that doesn't even acknowledge those are things.
Right.
Right. But yeah, there's all those layers beneath that in terms of like, well, why did you get Lyme and this person right here didn't? Like, why did you accumulate mold and this person over here didn't? There's deeper layers to ask why to really be satisfied, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there is some level of genetic predisposition. I've had my whole genetic panel read and I have very poor histamine clearance. So it makes sense that I struggled my whole life, but I no longer even have histamine symptoms. I don't have the chronic stuffy nose. I don't have any of that, even with the same genetics.
Yeah. Such a pet peeve of mine of people being like, well, I have this gene, I'm sure you get that too. Like, these layers modulate how those genes are going to express 100%.
Yeah, definitely.
So, I guess I'm curious, as you're going through these layers, because I'm sure some people are overwhelmed being like, oh my gosh, I have to address all of these. And you definitely clarified, not necessarily, maybe there's 1 or 2 we need to focus on. Do you have ways that you like to assess that, or an order of operations that you tend to go through with people?
Yeah, definitely. So I mentioned the HTMA. This is by far my favorite to really facilitate what nutrients do we need right now? What nutrients should we stay away from? Like taking zinc or copper, not always good, depending on what pattern you're in. And then also for that deep dive into the emotional trauma patterns. But I also really love to layer it with a test called bioenergetic testing. There's a lot of different technologies on the market, but the lab that I use has been around for over 14 or 15 years. And bioenergetics is hair and saliva, so it's really non-invasive and it's testing the entire body. So you get a full report of where the stress is, like how stressed are your organs, food and environmental sensitivities, the top most imbalanced nutrients and hormones, the top most stressful pathogens, including Lyme and all the co-infections, other bacteria, parasites, mold, yeast, chemicals, heavy metals, viruses. And then it also will show your emotional blocks, which I think is really fascinating. Like for me, the last time I did it, one of them was achievement, which is not an emotional block. But as you can tell, it's a big pattern in my life of I have to achieve to prove my self-worth, and then I get burned out. So it made sense that it would come up. And then it also will create a remedy protocol for you that's based on your height, your weight, your stress levels, your priority. And the whole remedy list is also tested together to make sure that it's not going to be overly stressful. But the reason I love bioenergetics for people who are more sensitive is because it tests for all different types of homeopathy. So for some people, depending on their sensitivity, we might just start with one homeopathic and see how that goes. Even with doing the other types of testing and seeing that they need other nutrients or whatnot. Like there's one that I really love. It's called BioCell Salts, or one called Rehydrate, which kind of helps you hold on to minerals better and kind of supports just the functioning of your mitochondria. And typically people will do okay with that one. Every once in a while, someone's too sensitive even for that. And if that's the case, I start with that nervous system work. And I just call this transformation coaching, which is kind of a hodgepodge of all of my personal experience, all of my higher education, but then all the certifications that I've gotten in the last couple of years that are like with facilitating different types of healing modalities like somatic healing and EMDR and theta healing, which is an energy healing technique. So depending on the person, we can start with any and all of those things, or we might start really, really slowly. And I'm a big proponent of the circadian rhythm and quantum biology science as well. So we really need to make sure we're doing the blue blockers and getting outside, even in just natural lighting for a couple of minutes. Like when I was in topical steroid withdrawal, I could not go outside. So I understand what it feels like to not be able to even see light. And as you can tell, even that my window tinting is blue. So I was just in blue light all day long, couldn't go outside. And being able to start to do that at a very slow level I felt like really started to speed things up. Hydration, also very important. So it just depends on the person where we start. And I also really want to honor what they are coming to me for, because usually they have a reason. You know, I've worked with this person and this person, I've done this and this and a million things. And they have found me for a reason, and I want to honor that reason. So if the reason is I really resonate with this, then we will do that. Because that's really my goal with working with people, is to help them to develop that intuition, to look inside of themselves instead of practitioner hopping, doctor hopping until, you know, it's a never ending cycle until you really take that radical responsibility. And a lot of people come to me because they realize that, okay, I need to do this inner work, and I'm not going to do anything else sometimes. Sometimes they don't even want to do testing at all.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, I feel like we could keep talking forever, but that was also a really lovely note to wrap it up on, I think, just with like radical responsibility and flexibility in where you start, you know, really honoring where people are at and having a lot of different options in the table so that you can really find where a person's kind of opening is onto their healing path. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing so much of your perspective and your story. I think it's going to be so wonderful for people to hear. You know, I just love sharing these inspiring stories of people who have, you know, really been through hell and yet have come out the other side and become just better, you know, more self-actualized people on the other end. So thank you so much for being another inspiring story. Is there anything last that you want to share or plug? I think you said you had a relaunch of a program coming.
Yeah, so I had a program called How to Feel that I did last year, and I revamped it, and it's going to be re-released with another name. It's going to be called Feel to Heal, Transforming
Hmm,
Triggers into Calm. So I'm really
beautiful.
excited about it. It's going to be completely evergreen, and I'm going to start adding in weekly or maybe bi-weekly, monthly coaching with it, like group coaching to hopefully
Yeah,
reach more people, and some of the people who either don't want to work one-on-one or don't have the finances, they can reach me there.
perfect. Okay, well, I'll make sure I link your website in the description. And yeah, thank you again.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. This was awesome.